200-person conference in New York City for Second Life residents. They did it all without ever meeting. They did all the organization inside Second Life, and they included streaming video, which you're, on this screenshot, you're seeing a person inside Second Life watching the streaming video that's being streamed into the virtual world. So if you have all the metas there correctly. And they did all this, completely organized it. It was one of these things that when you were at the conference, you had to look around and go, there's no way this could have happened. I'm sure that the CCC feels the same way, that you get these incredible group of people together, and you're like, how did this actually all get pulled off? The bottom left, I don't know, did Mystery Science Theater ever come over to Europe? Do people know what that is? So MST3K was a US TV show where they'd play really bad movies and then mock the dialogue. And it's actually, I'm sure you've done it with your friends, right? You're watching this really bad movie and you just start mocking what's going on. Well, it turns out that if you can stream movies into a collaborative space, you can sit up with people from all over the world and mock bad movies, which turns out to be a lot of fun. And so that's what people are doing in the bottom left. They're watching, there are a lot of public domain movies on the web from like these really bad 50s, like how to, American how-to films, like how to be a good son and, a date with your family. And so they're really fun to sit around and just mock for the values that they attempt to pass along. Another good example of blasting through the magic circle, so Cory Doctorow, who's a sci-fi author who I'm sure many of you have read, he releases all of his work with Creative Commons. So a bunch of Second Life users made readers for his book inside Second Life. Well, what do you do then? Well, you clearly have to have a book signing. So Cory came into Second Life and did a book signing. What he would do is he'd sign pieces of paper. He'd then take a picture of them and upload them into Second Life because you can upload textures. And the people would then add the texture into their book. So the bottom right is somebody who now has a signed digital book of Cory Doctorow's book in a virtual world. And the cool thing was seeing the line that was stretching out, because given that you can be basically everything, you had everything from completely normal looking avatars to giant walking robots walking up with their book, please sign my book, And Cory really gets this stuff. He actually wrote a short story on his game, or Onda's game, that talked about the economic future of some of the things that can happen in these places. And of course, what was fun is he was writing it fictionally for sort of the future, and basically everything he wrote about has been happening in Second Life. So the idea of being able to collaborate with multimedia sources in a shared space, right? This is sort of the holy grail of teleconferencing and all of this stuff that's really, really hard to do in the real world, and our residents have been building all of it in Second Life. Like the one on the right is this InfoNet. It's a shared network running inside Second Life, built completely by users using the scripting language that we know nothing about, passing information around, and they talk about places to go and things to avoid, and it's so good that we've actually put up InfoNet kiosks at all of the new user arrival areas because it's better than anything we could have made. So, and obviously Second Life isn't a game, but there is a great deal of play that goes on there. And the bottom left is a really cool example. So Tringo was a game made by an Australian programmer over sort of his Christmas holidays. And it swept Second Life, and he made like 5,000 US or so, in Second Life. But more interestingly, he actually licensed the rights to Tringo to the real world, and in January it's going to come out on the Game Boy Advanced. So you have a game that was completely written and tested inside a virtual world that's going to be sold on a Nintendo portable gaming product in the real world. And he's the one who got all the money for it. We had nothing to do with it. So thinking back to this trap that games are getting into, when you look at the power of user creation, this starts getting very interesting, because you start seeing this enormous potential for people to really go and explore the design space of games in very cost-effective ways, because they can leverage the creation that everybody else is doing. One of the other things we've seen is a lot of what we kind of loosely term real work in Second Life. And this is everything from both UC Davis, University of California, Davis, and Dartmouth have done disaster preparedness simulations using Second Life, because it's so much cheaper for them to build mock-ups in Second Life. And when you're doing first responder training, one of the most important things is figuring out, well, where do I stand, where do I walk, where do I put the box of medicine so I can walk around it. And when you have physically modeled avatars, you can do all that. And if they'd had to build the system from scratch to do all that, it would have been enormously expensive for them to try to do that. And then, of course, we also see the inverse. We see people moving out to the real world their businesses in Second Life. Everything from clothing creators, people selling land. There is an ad company that has sprung up that they've bought all this land in Second Life. They have these signs that rotate ads that track to see if there's an avatar nearby looking at them, and they count that as an impression. And they track it all in a database out in the real world. And who knows whether it's going to be successful or not, but it didn't cost them very much money to try, and they're having a blast doing it. The other thing you see is a lot, much like the memorials, you see people are very generous with virtual currencies. I think to some people it's just poker chips. They don't think of it as real. And in the American Cancer Society, they do a very big yearly event called Relay for Life. And so they actually, where you as a participant go out and say, hey, will you contribute this much money per mile that I run? And what's interesting is they did a Relay for Life inside Second Life. So you had avatars running around a track who had gone out and got pledges for how many laps they'd do. And they raised thousands and thousands of dollars US doing that. So, and they're actually, American Cancer Society is actually moving to have a more permanent presence inside Second Life because they really see charitable giving in online spaces as very much a future direction for them. And so this kind of comes back to this whole play versus work dichotomy. And I guess the only thing is, 40 hours a week at McDonald's or some fast food joint versus the guy on the lower right. The guy on the lower right was a homeless musician who, while staying with some friends, figured out that he could stream audio into Second Life Live. And so he started playing at a jazz club inside Second Life and started earning enough money to pay his friends who he was staying with. So which one of those is play and which one of them is work, and which one of them has certainly more social redeeming qualities, I will leave as an exercise to the listener. So again, we kind of go back to this whole bits versus atoms discussion, is that when you stay virtual, you have a low or zero marginal cost of reproduction. That means you don't have to deal with traffic, Walmart. The same economies of scale don't apply. The same thing that we're seeing with digital distribution in other media forms, you're now applying to all sorts of things in Second Life. Oh, and lest you think that all these bits are just going to stay bits forever, I highly encourage you to read Fab by Neil Gershenfeld. The work they're doing at MIT with Fab Labs is incredible. This is the idea of how to build anything. And in fact, the radar discussion from the previous one where he needed this very complicated mechanical thing built, he should probably just go to eMachine Shop or Squid Lab, because if you give them a CAD file, they'll machine it for you. But the idea that Neil has done is that you can take like $20,000 worth of equipment, drop it into a third world country or a disadvantaged area, and have kids start building everything from really complicated mechanical stuff to integrated circuits. And remember how we were talking about supposedly hard things like 3D modeling, people, coding? Well, guess what? You drop the right tools in front of kids, they go, so what if this is supposed to be hard? It's fun. And they go to town, and before you know it, they're actually building useful and interesting things. And what they found is when they drop it into the third world, the kids are there first, but then the adults come in and start saying, well, I actually need a moisture sensor for my farm, or I actually need a tracking system to track my flock up in the mountains. And so they start using the same tools to build really interesting things. And obviously, the emailing of a design to a fab unit, we're just about there already. In the next 5 years, we'll definitely get there. So the other thing to remember is because everything is collaborative in this space and everything's happening in the same shared space, you can take advantage of the most powerful learning model, which is peripheral participation. What that is the best way to learn something is to just be around people who are experts. Right? It's in fact the whole purpose of Linux user groups, right? And any other, so for my era, it was Atari user groups, right? It was to get together and sit around the people who were really smart and watch what they were doing, and that's how you learned. And it turns out that when you're in a world where everything's collaborative, that's what you can do. And in fact, because we haven't crashed yet, I think it's time to live on the edge. So let us pop to a sandbox. So sandboxes in Second Life are sort of public building areas. We sort of wipe them, I think, twice a day. But sort of anybody can build there, and you never really know what's going on. But what you'll find when you get there is usually a lot of people sort of sitting around. Plywood is sort of the default texture when you first make something. So when you see large pieces of plywood, it's probably because people are experimenting. You can kind of see people are building everything from whatever this weird structure is. It's something. I don't know what it is. And it looks like it has a radar tower on it, so it fits in with the last talk. That's good. And this is pretty typical, and it sort of ebbs and flows. We're actually at a pretty low point usage-wise during the day. And let's really live on the edge and see whether we can suck the map down. This will be, we'll use a lot of bandwidth here. The whole use more bandwidth, we'll take care of that here, because what we're going to do is we're going to suck down sort of the Google map of the world. And you can see all the green dots are people. Oops, let's only see the green dots. So again, lest you think that I'm cheating, this is the live world. You can see where people are. People are clustered out on the areas out in the water we call private islands. These are people who want to have a little bit more control. Maybe they want to zone more carefully. Because the mainland that we own, we don't really zone. So people, you can have a castle next to a total Bauhaus structure next to a dance club. And some people decide they want to have more zoning than that. So let's pop back here. And actually the slides that we're showing, this was just built using the same tool set that you used to build things in the world. There's just one of the places you can attach things is in a reference frame relative to the camera. So anybody could do the same thing. So peripheral participation leads to amateur behavior. And by amateur, I don't mean not good at it, but what I mean is not sort of an acknowledged expert, right? 99.99999% of the Linux community would be termed amateurs in a lot of ways because they have some other job that's their sort of real job, and then they're contributing to the open source community. The bottom right is another interesting punch through the magic circle. This is a life drawing class in a virtual world. What people do is they put up an avatar, people draw it in the real world, they scan it, they upload it into Second Life, and then they comment on each other's life drawing skills. And that's turned out to be a fairly popular activity. Again, something that if you'd asked me to predict what are the things going on in Second Life, that would not have been high on my list. And then we've had a lot of conferences actually done inside Second Life. The upper left is a future salon. They do monthly meetings, they bring in guests, and they have people from all over the world come in and discuss and meet the guests. The guests give lectures. They're really fun to go to. The bottom left was Make Magazine actually is selling Make Magazine inside Second Life. And we're starting to see people really closing the loop of going from a place in the world to basically a Flickr knockoff Snapzilla that a user built that allows people to organize their Second Life snapshots. And then Roam is a search engine where they built these bots that go out and scurry around the world gathering data and report it all out to their database, and then they sort of do a Google index search into that. And because you can spawn Second Life off of an URL if you've installed the client, all of their links, you just click on it and then you launch Second Life and you arrive at that location. So, and you'll see sort of our next steps are going to be closing that loop even tighter. And oh yes, there are a lot of schools using Second Life. Just take my word for it rather than waiting for the text to resonate. There are about 200 educators and researchers using Second Life. One of the other areas we've seen is therapy. So there were 9 severely physically disabled people on cerebral palsy who had their caregiver taking them into Second Life. And when you then read their blogs talking about their experience of interacting in a virtual world where for a long time nobody knew that the people behind the avatar, well, that A, that it was more than one person, and that B, that they were severely physically disabled, that this had a profound effect on their lives. When you read about them talking about this was the person I always thought I should be. There's also a program in Portugal where abused teens are using Second Life both to get comfortable in social settings again and to learn programming so that they have a leg up when they start going back to school. And we've seen stroke survivors also organizing groups. And since we're running a little short, I'm not going to actually go there, but the Wild Cunningham, this group of cerebral palsy victims, the next thing they did is they built an area inside Second Life to teach people about cerebral palsy and other neurological disorders. So this urge of once they were in a world where they felt able to do all of these things, the first urge they had was to then educate others, which I think says something very powerful. Another big research item that happened in Second Life was this virtual hallucinations. They, at UC Davis, two medical